Well, thank you everyone for joining us today at the Visas.AI Attorney Collab. We're joined by some wonderful attorneys and non-attorneys, including myself. Today's spotlight attorney is attorney Ingrid Perez. Welcome in. I'll give a quick
Hi,
introduction about
thanks for
her and
having
then
me.
I'll pass the mic to
Thank you.
everyone, starting with her, of course. Attorney Perez, thanks for joining us. You're the founder of IBP Immigration, a law firm that supports people through their whole transition to America. Your firm was, of course, founded by you, a fellow immigrant who understands immigrants' needs. The cool thing that stood out to me is that you speak English, Portuguese, and Spanish, which is
Mhm.
awesome. So, welcome in. Do you usually serve multiple markets, or are your clients mostly Portuguese or Spanish speaking?
Yeah, thank you so much. I was born in Brazil, but I've lived in the US since I was about 9 years old. I'm very Americanized. And I grew up in New York. And when I was an attorney in New York, I never really had Brazilian clients because I was a public defender for many years. And then once I moved to Florida and transitioned completely into immigration, is where I really rediscovered my Brazilian self and improved my Portuguese because it had, gone really badly for many years by not, having Brazilian clients and be able to, speak Portuguese on a daily basis. But right now, I have multiple markets because I have a lot of English only speakers or people from all over the world. But just by being a Brazilian American attorney, I get a lot of Brazilian clients, and because I can speak Spanish and where I am, there's also a huge Hispanic population, so it's very helpful to have the languages. And I think the cultural connection in this in this practice of law is really important as well. So it helps.
Excellent. Where are you based out of, if I may ask?
I'm in Orlando. I'm in Orlando.
Oh, I'm in Orlando too.
Oh,
I didn't
nice.
realize
Okay.
that until now. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's definitely that's something I always mention and I talk about is that Florida in general is just a whole different world from all the other states that when we usually have these conversations and I hear all these different attorneys speak about their markets, I just think it's very different here and it's unique. Also, John, we spoke recently about EB-5s and E2s. I truly think, and this is not based on data, it's just based on my opinion, that Orlando, and Attorney Perez, correct me if I'm wrong, has a lot of investors that come in and
Mhm.
buy real estate, and most of them are usually Brazilian. We have a huge population that comes here and invests. So that's the beauty about Orlando is that I feel that there are these emerging markets that have a different type of visa, you know. So
Yeah.
what visas do you usually do in immigration?
I do a lot of family-based cases. So I would say, about 60% of my practice is family immigration, which I consider to be taking the client from initial green card, removal of conditions, up until they become a US citizen. So I do a lot of that. And then once they become US citizens, we can help with parents and maybe other family members, which is really nice. And then I do maybe about 30, I would say about 20% employment based. So I love working on EB-2 and IWs and EB-1s. I find that with immigration, sometimes it's you don't get an opportunity to create an argument and write persuasively all the time because it can be very technical. So I like these cases because I love to write and research and just get to know these clients who do really amazing things. And I feel like it's so rewarding to help bring somebody to the United States who's going to do something really, really interesting and really good for the country. So I like doing those cases a lot. I do some E2s as well, and I do quite a few VAWAs as well. I like doing those humanitarian cases just because it's I come from public interest, so I like to do those types of cases. So that's what I do, and I love obviously doing citizenships, naturalizations. It's really great. I don't do removals. I refer those cases out. Being a former public defender, I was in court all the time, and now I just like to be in my office doing the cases. But I refer those cases out to attorneys who are specialized in that. I think the clients would be much better served that way.
Well, that's wonderful. I think we should disconnect from the script and regular questions and actually go off script and open the conversation to attorney John and Ashley and Yash. I'd love to give you guys the mic to ask Ingrid questions because I think there's a lot here.
I'd love to jump in if it's okay.
Please.
Ingrid, love the practice you've chosen.
we all find immigration in our own way. I hung my shingle right out of law school and took anything. And I just got out of different bodies of law as they just didn't interest me anymore. I was on the other side of the criminal case, and I had a murder case, attempted murder, with a member of the Mexican mafia who had a 27-year deal on the table, and his attorney didn't show up. And his nephew was in law school with my brother, and they called me and said, "Can you come up to the courthouse?" And I'm like, "When?" They said, "Look, now." So I go up. I get the judge to give me a month to prepare for the jury trial, and had a 3-day jury trial, and I walked it completely, not guilty, because they had a tape recording of a 911 call, and they went first, and when we slowed down the 911 call, we could see my client offering to help this person who said he was trying to run him over with a car. And so get him out, not guilty. And then the guy just said, "I'm not paying you."
Oh
And there's
man.
nothing you can do about it. And then and then he moved like down the street from me. And I had small children. And I'm like, I'm never doing another criminal case. I'm out. Right. And so it was little by little, I got out of divorces because I was tired of going through divorces with people. They were really tough, and found immigration. And what a wonderful body of law. I mean, immigrants, whatever visa they get, are so happy for what we accomplish for them. They give us way too much credit, especially green cards. They're over the moon about it, and I love it. And I got lucky to cut my teeth on EB-1s. Right, I was a rugby player when rugby went pro. I was actually in New Zealand on a tour when they made the decision while we were there, and I did the first green card for a pro rugby player, and he was in Aspen, Colorado. And when we did it, my phone starts ringing off the hook, right? So I started representing people around the country. I knew that you could do that, but immediately I get this national practice around sports because this guy's in Aspen. It went to then skiing. I met a bunch of Brazilians in Aspen, by the way. There's a huge community of Aspen snowboarders that were surfers, right? No snowflake in Brazil, but there's this whole pocket of them, and they had a reality show called Snow Mess, and they were just wonderful, fun people that I got to know really well, and we did a bunch of visas for them. And it's funny how you fall into this and how it grows. But nice to hear about how you got into yours, and we all find our own pathway to it, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was in New York, right? And then my husband and I decided to move our family to Orlando because his family lives here. And I was just thinking, I've always wanted to transition into immigration. And for me, it just felt very natural because I'm an immigrant. And I knew that, the market here would be great for me with the growing Brazilian population and lots of Hispanics and just people that I could really relate to. And then the other added bonus, obviously, I would not have to take the bar again, right? So that was a nice
Oh,
bonus.
really? So is it because
Yeah.
I'm not very educated about that side. So you have to retake the bar for some parts of law if you choose to practice?
So immigration is federal law, and I think bankruptcy is the other area of law where you can practice with, any state license anywhere in the country. So I don't need to be barred in Florida to practice immigration law exclusively, which is really, really nice. So you see a lot of attorneys with licenses from other states move across the country and open their immigration exclusive practices, and they're able to practice as an attorney with their license, in good standing from the state where they were barred. So that's a really nice plus. And when I've told this to some law students and even other lawyers. I did this one panel one time, and everybody was just shocked and surprised. They had no idea.
It's
So it's really
amazing.
nice. It gives you that flexibility.
I fell into mine like I described, but my mentor was the longest serving immigration attorney in Chinatown in San Francisco, and he knew he was going to be an immigration attorney. I mean, he went to law school. He knew that he was going to serve that market. So he went to law school in California, which has a ridiculously tough bar. So he went up and got barred in Wyoming. He found the easiest bar you could do in America and went and got his bar license there, and then practiced in San Francisco his entire career. Yeah. So you can play those odds if you want.
Yeah. And I think, being an immigration lawyer now, I do really find the immigration lawyer body just really wonderful,
Mm-hmm.
because it's us against the man, right?
That's right.
So we're all in it together. And I think people are very willing to collaborate and willing to help. And also, we know what the negative consequence of having a case denied, or
Yeah.
making a mistake. And, it's often something that you can't undo. Immigration is unforgiving that way. So we really try to help each other out. And I think that's so wonderful, really, whether it's with a legal question, or maybe just a process, or a
Yeah.
tool, a system, a technology, I don't know, a business plan writer, whatever it is, right? It's
And
really
I'm glad you said that, because that's really what's at the heart of what we're doing today. And, I told you about my mentor, very kind guy that took me under his wing and would help me do cases, got me into all sorts of different type of immigration I didn't know on different parts of the country. And I knew him, but I really got to know him better as an adult. And we were in different parts of America. He was in San Francisco. I was in Oklahoma. We would meet at AILA conferences, and I didn't know about AILA at the beginning because I wasn't in immigration at the beginning. I got into it in my first year, but when I first started, I didn't know that I was going to do this. And so I found that organization was wonderful about helping for exactly what you said. We all have the same opposing counsel, right?
great.
And we want to share ideology. So that's where the idea of what we're doing now came from. And this thing we call Collab is that, right? I always thought of AILA as a thing that we go to once a year and you get a little nugget. What if we could do this all the time? What
Yeah.
if we could help other lawyers all the time be better lawyers? So what our evolution is that we created Online Visas was the name of my website. And then I created it as its own company to build a technology. And we built this technology called Visas.AI now. And it effectively did what the other tech weren't doing for us, right? I've gone through every type of form filling package there's been out there. For years it was INS Zoom, and I would go to them and I'd quit and then I'd come back or whatever. And so what they didn't do, which is really interesting because of your background, is I litigated also. And as a litigator, every argument you made, you had to back up with authority because there's somebody on the other side that was going to come at you with, their own arguments, right? And you couldn't just do it. And I found so many immigration attorneys were putting in table of contents and leaving it to immigration to interpret, which means you're not being a lawyer, right? I mean, why are we here if we're not going to identify issues and then be persuasive and use whatever we can to help them understand it? So I always look at as being an immigration attorney is being a litigator on paper. Right. Like what we've done, and we invented a process, because I see the old fragment models and things like that. I'm like, man, these just aren't good enough. So I said, this is equivalent to walking into a court and saying, I waive my opening statement and I'm not going to ask any direct questions to my client. I'm going to leave it to my opposing counsel to attack them, and then I'll try to rehabilitate. That's how most immigration attorneys process their visas, right? So we invented a briefing process because we were doing so many EB-1s and O-1s that we would tell an opening statement, right? Why not tell the story about why this person's good for America? There's no requirement that says we can't, right? So we would lay it out. Here's who they are. Here's why they're good, all these sort of things. And then we would go through the legal analysis like you would a litigation brief, right? What's the standard? It was amazing to me that most immigration attorneys would never tell immigration what the law was. Right. And they would allow them. And we all know, coming out of other bodies of law, that agency law is just relaxed anyway. Right. I mean, if you're at federal courts are really, really meticulous. State courts aren't as much. But agency law is a step above night court. They kind of do what they do. And they're like, well, the regulation might say this. This is how we think it is. And so I'm like, why do we let them frame the question? Right? The question's framed by the regulations. Then they're held to a standard of what their policy memorandum says, right? We're not held to it because that's just their bosses or their policy people's interpretation of it, but we can use it against them. And I'll do it all the time with our deal. I'll say, here's what the plain language of the reg says. Here's what your policy memo instructs adjudicators to do. Here's an AAO decision that may or not be precedential, but it is persuasive. And USCIS got knocked down last time they tried to make this argument. And then if there's a federal court case, we'll do that. And one of my favorite federal court cases is called BSTEC, and it's a Supreme Court case, which means, for anybody out there that doesn't know what this is all about, the Supreme Court law, their interpretation is, it's not open for suggestion. It is what it is. And what BSTEC says, that a vocational expert's opinion is evidence, right? And so what immigration attorneys do, or adjudicators do all the time, they will say that the expert opinion is a testimonial. It's not. And they will say it's not persuasive for whatever reason they want to say, when the Supreme Court says that opinion is evidence, right? You don't have the opportunity to say that opinion isn't any good because they're experts and you're not putting up your own expert, right? So if you think about it like a litigator, they could go out and hire their own expert in whatever this body of expertise is, but they never do, ever, right? And so we've created this briefing system in this technology. And I had a really interesting case where they said my client met 4 of the 3 criteria for the EB-1, right? Which I've never seen 4 met before and denied in my history. But I looked out and I'd seen it once. And it was in San Francisco, and they litigated and they won. So my guy happened to be an architect for a massive software company we've all heard of in the Bay Area. And I went right back to the same judge and said, I'm going to sue him. And I got him to reopen and give us the approval on the argument that they did not follow the BSTEC ruling that an expert's opinion is evidence. And they didn't even consider it, right? They ignored it, and which is what they do, right? They gave us a 1-page denial that just says it's insufficient, and they didn't say, here's what the expert opinion is, and here's how we disagree with it. They acted like it wasn't even in there. And that, to kind of use this as an opportunity to explain what we do, is arbitrary and capricious, and that's the standard for violation of the federal law, which is the Agency Procedures Act, to then litigate these cases if you ever do that. And very few immigration attorneys will litigate their cases. They'll do motions to reopen, or they just accept it.
Is there a reason why, John? Is there a reason? Is there a negative for doing so?
Well, the reason they don't, I believe, is 1, it takes a while. 2, to bring a federal lawsuit takes a lot of effort and time, and therefore it's expensive. And 3, most immigration attorneys didn't have a background like Ingrid and I did, that they litigated before they got into this. They have literally just put these packages together, and that's it, right? But if you litigate, that's the finish line. That's like, I can take this to somebody else who will make a decision, and you can't just say what you're going to take. But I think it's such a different body of law, right? That most immigration attorneys are not litigators, and those in immigration that do court-based stuff are doing it within the parameters of an agency-based deportation hearing and stuff like that, and are not used to going up against hardened, really good attorneys on the other side that are from big law and have Harvard backgrounds and stuff like that. And you kind of need to have that to go into those courts, in my opinion, because they don't mess around. The judges don't mess around. That's their cases, not your cases, and you can easily stumble. So you really have to have some of that experience a lot of times to do it. And there are guys and women that do focus on that, and they oftentimes are the recipients of our cases. So you go find these guys, and then they go, hey, I got this denial. Would you litigate on behalf of my client? But it's usually very expensive, and most people that are applying for a visa or a company that's just like, I'll go on to the next person.
Or reapply, right?
Yeah, reapplying is a lot cheaper, and many times you'll get a better answer.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I agree. And I like to put my cases together thinking about, what if I have to take this to court, right? And I think that's why I like the EB-1s and the EB-2 and IWs, because you get to, tell your client's story on paper and really make an argument, right? And I also always think about the idea of preserving the record. I want to preserve the record for my client in the event it goes that far. I agree that most times the clients are not willing to, they don't want to start their immigration journey litigating against the government, right? But there's such value to getting, a federal court to say, no, this was wrong, right? And maybe creating a precedent or something like that can be beneficial to another case. But it is hard. It is expensive. And a lot of people who are immigrants don't want to necessarily do that. But us as attorneys, I think, it's so great when you win on those terms,
Mhm.
because you're like, okay, I was right, right? And I think too, a lot of times we can't be scared of challenging the government on what this means, on what the law is, or how it should be interpreted. And like that case, if you're not doing your job, it's up to us to, hey, you're not following the law,
Yeah. And it's funny you say that, because it's not the government. It's some person, right?
Right.
That
Yeah.
thinks that because of their position, that they can rack somebody's life, and that's what they're doing, right? And behind that case is a human being that had a dream of coming to this country, or a company that wanted to hire from the world because it really needed the talent that they found, and some bureaucrat really just made a decision that they're not good enough. And when extraordinary people get turned down, it's devastating to them. They don't understand it. And ironically, the people that are turning them down usually can't hold a candle to them in whatever it is, but they're just making a decision. Nope, you're not good enough. And it's really rough. What I love about employment-based immigration is the percentages are really high that you're going to get them approved. And that's why I don't really do with much removal, because I think it's the opposite, right? I think a lot of people, there's just no answer, right? They came
Right.
in without authorization, or they've been out of status. There's other than the U's and visas that have come up, there's not usually a lot that you can do. Maybe marrying an American, but that's not even an absolute for a lot of people. But on the employment base, you win most of the time, and it's really nice, and it's very rewarding. And again, that's why I ended up in this body of law, and have been there the minute I found it. I fell in love with it.
Can we maybe shift the conversation
Yeah.
back to cases when it comes to, I always love, and I know you guys do as well. We always like to ask the question about a special case that stood out for you. So why don't we ask you that question, Attorney Perez, about, a specific case, whether it was negative or positive, that really it stuck with you.
Yeah. So this was an EB-2 and IW case that I did earlier this year, actually, and this was one of those cases that this client came to the United States. Well, this client tried an L before. They had a business in their country. They tried an L. The L was denied. I don't think that they didn't quite understand what an L entailed. They were here in the United States on a student status. And the client had, prior to that, while living in their home country, they opened a business here in the United States. Like, that was the basis of their L, right? They hired an entire team here in the US. They had maybe 10 people, I think, running his whole operation. He was just really the investor. And they were here in the United States, on a student visa. They had gone to different attorneys, and they were trying to figure out how can they stay, right? It was a couple, they had 3 kids, or they have 3 kids, little kids, and they just wanted to be here and one day work on the business. And we had a bunch of meetings because this was a very unconventional client. And when we talked about the possibility of an EB-2, we were going on the entrepreneurial side. So at that point, it was just really about exploring what their business was and how can I make an argument that this business was in the national interest, right? And we had like 2 meetings before I agreed to take on their case. The first meeting was with the wife, and she was the one that kind of handled everything for her husband. And we really had a great, we kind of hit it off. I think our personalities just kind of matched. So then she came back a second time with her husband, and we were talking again. And this client really, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, he was working at a gas station. And then he started his entrepreneurial journey. And over the course of 15 years, he was able to build this incredible company. And what he did is he buys machinery, manufacturing equipment, all these types of things that the government sells at auction, and he repairs them. He has this company that repairs all this machinery, and he sells them in the secondary market, right? And then in talking about this, I was thinking about, okay, what are the benefits of a business like that? And I thought, well, for one, he is helping, he's buying directly from the government, right? So it's bringing more money into the pocket of our government, right? Second, he is repairing all these machines that are no longer functioning and making them available to the secondary market. And it's keeping them out of our landfills, right? It's keeping our lands cleaner or whatever. And also this idea of a circular economy, right? How can we reuse, recycle, find more efficient ways to use our products and make these machineries these machines that are still that are after you fix them, they're in great working condition, and maybe it can help a small manufacturer, a small business that is just opening up and maybe they don't have the ability to buy brand new equipment or constantly upgrade or things like
Right.
that, right? And he was working with small manufacturers all over the United States and actually all over the world. He even had medical equipment that he would resell to doctors that he would fix and resell. And we went the entire angle, for his EB-2, I presented him as an entrepreneur, and I relied a lot on the other comparable evidence if you don't have evidence that meets the other criteria.
Yeah.
And he was approved.
Nice.
And I was surprised. I was shocked because I was like, listen, I don't like to take on a case that I don't feel I can win, right? Because I like to win. And I know these cases are expensive and the clients are putting a lot of hope and they're putting a lot of hope in that, right? But we had several meetings and they understood that it was it was 50-50. But at the end of the day, they won. And I was like, wow. Right. And they wanted premium process. And I was like, don't do premium process because we're going to get an RFE. And they're like, no, we just need to know if we get an RFE, it's okay. Like, they had no
They
problem
didn't have the patience.
saying
They didn't
like
want to wait.
nothing. They just wanted an answer because they were like, if this is not going to happen, we're just going to pack our bags and we're going to move back to our country.
Did they get
And
an
they were
RFE?
no, it was
Wow.
approved in 7 days with premium
7
process. And now
days.
we're waiting for the visa bulletin.
Well, I got questions.
Very
Ashley
good.
or Yes, you guys want to pop in and talk with Ingrid a little bit about this case? You guys are on mute if you're talking.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too many comments. That's awesome. I can't believe you didn't even get an RFE.
I know. I was shocked too.
Yeah.
I was so shocked.
Yes, you got any thoughts on it?
No, I was like, when you said that you didn't get an RFE, I was like, wow, that's amazing. Especially because, like
Yeah.
with Joan's example, you get cases where you're like, I meet 4 of these 7 qualifications, and they still throw it back at you.
Yeah. Well,
I think too, it just like sometimes you get lucky with that officer, and it goes back to what John said, right? It's not necessarily the government, it's some person who's deciding. And I always think of the immigration officer, I think of them as like a blank slate, right? I'm like, I'm going to assume that this person has no idea what being a business owner is. And I am going to explain to them, and not in the condescending way, obviously, but I just want to make it very simple for them to understand what it is that this person does and why it is important, right? So I think that being a good writer, a good storyteller, being able to formulate your ideas and express them on paper and have the documentation to back it up is really what these cases are about. And I think that they are difficult, they are hard to put together, but I think that with the EB-2 and IWs, what I like about them is because that if you're kind of, aware of what's going on in the world, you can have an idea or you can come up with an argument to make on behalf of your client, right? So for example, right now, people who are, with STEM degrees, they are a hot commodity for the United States. And if you're aware of what's going on, if that AI is really hot right now, right? You have that person with that background, you can make an argument, and the internet is wonderful and the government reports and all these things are wonderful to just back up your argument. And I think if you're resourceful and savvy in that way, it kind of gives you an edge when you're doing these cases.
I love that you got it done. I also love that you thought through why is this in the national interest? And I think that so much of immigration is just duplicative, that it doesn't either invite in people that are thinking outside of it, or people get too busy and they just make the same argument over and over again, right? I think there's a lot of people in our space that are literally doing the same thing over and over and over, and they don't take on these cases, they don't know how to do these cases, or they try to do these cases in the way they would do those cases, right? And that's what's different. And I find this great that I wouldn't have jumped to the recycling element. I love that's where you went with it, because that is helpful to us. And the cool thing about the national interest waiver is that it's broad. And so it's really there for you to be creative if you want to be, but you have to be creative or it won't occur to you, right? So it
Right.
takes an inquisitive mind. And then and I want to ask you a couple questions on the anatomy of this case, just to see what you did, and to see, what ideas are of attorneys, because you already got it done, right? So
Yeah.
if you were coming to us the first time saying, what would you guys do about it? We'd probably have all these ideas. So I'd like to deconstruct it just for the sake of looking at it like lawyers look at things. So when you came up with the idea of the recycling, how did that come into your mind? Did they tell you that? Did you think it through? And what did you do once you had that idea?
I think I thought of that because I was thinking of like the idea of the circular economy. Once I started to do a little research on how I can make, a business plan out of this or how I could present this to the government, I was thinking of the circular economy. And the environment is like super important to me.
Right.
So this is something I always think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, what he's really doing is he's repurposing these machines and these this equipment and reusing it, right? It's reuse, recycle. It's just that circular economy, that cycle, and to me it was just very obvious. It wasn't something that I really had to like think about too much. It was just something that I definitely knew I wanted to talk about in the case. And
So let's
to me it was just obvious.
talk about how you talked about it. Okay. So you got this idea, recycling, it's there. What did you do to gain more knowledge on it, if anything? And how did you articulate it? And where did you articulate it in the case?
So that came to me in the initial conversations that I had with the client before I decided to take on the case. So I always tell clients when I'm, deciding whether or not to take on an EB-2 or an EB-1, like explain to me what you do in very simple terms, right? It's your opportunity to really make me understand so that I can explain to the officer.
I'd say the same thing.
Yeah.
If
So
I can't understand what you do, then the officer's
Right,
not going to be able to.
exactly. So it's like, take me through your processes. How did you begin? Tell me your whole entire story. And then I just ask a ton of questions, right? And then from that point, I just start thinking about, okay, my strategy is coming to my mind. And in those conversations, I had the idea of the recycling. So I said, okay, we're going to present you as an entrepreneur because first of all, he didn't have a college degree. So I couldn't qualify him as an EB-2 through advanced degree or equivalent, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, we have to go with exceptional ability. So we're going to go with your exceptional ability as an entrepreneur. The guy had just gotten a GED from his country not that long ago.
Right.
So it's like I didn't have much to work with. So I encouraged him to, while we're working on the case, I encouraged him to, maybe get some memberships in like, set up his company as much as he could here in the United States. Obviously, he's here with the student status, so it's limited what he could do, right? But he's the investor of the company, so there's some things that he could do. So we worked on the prongs that we could, right? And I used a lot of that comparable evidence. And I basically I created sort of like a mini L1 where I explained that he had this company in Brazil that was very, very, and I basically said, look, he's already done it and he's doing it here in the United States. He's going to continue doing it. I had all of his employees write letters on his behalf, and he hired like his manager, the one that takes care of the entire business. He's a veteran. He's somebody that has been working with him since he started the company while he was living abroad, right? And he did this whole thing. And I had his bookkeeper, his account write a letter explaining the economic impact that he's going to have. I wrote, I had all of his employees write letters saying, we want to keep working and he has the potential of growing this business. And he had plans to open up another office location on, the Canadian border because he wanted to do, he wanted to export and things like that. So I created a business plan that explained all of this, and it took many revisions. And I showed that his company, through his employees, were in the process of actually doing what he's saying he's going to do, right? They were already buying from the US government, and he was able to take and all his tax returns, obviously. And I was able to show that he had, grown significantly in the span of like 3 years. His company was making millions of dollars, right? So he has the potential to employ dozens of
He's in
people.
the
He
right
really,
position. He's got
yeah,
the right background. He's done it. Those are all
right.
prongs of
Yeah. So
the.
that's what I did. And,
Did you
just
wrap in the recycling element into the business plan?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And what
Good
I
place to
like
put
to
it.
do, yeah. So, and what I like to do sometimes too, I love sending photos
Yep.
about
Yeah.
these cases. So I had him send me photos of his warehouse
Mhm.
in Brazil, his office, all of his machines, his catalogs. I had him revamp his website, to make it more sophisticated and more robust. So,
Nice.
because at the end of the day, you have to show that the client, that he's well positioned, right? That the person is
Yes.
well positioned. And all these things, your business plan is it's a real business. It's not something it's aspirational, it's real.
Yeah.
And here he is really doing it. We have the financials, we have the profit and loss, all of that. So I just really focus on presenting him as an entrepreneur who is working in this really interesting
Yeah.
space. And even though, it's not okay, yes, he's buying things from, auction and fixing them, but really what he's doing is not just that. He's helping create a circular economy that's going to benefit so many critical infrastructure sectors in the United
And
States.
did you use an expert to evaluate that component of it?
I used a business plan company,
I'm not
but
talking about
that's
the business plan. I think that was great that you did that. But the one and look, here's the great thing. It's you can come at this in so many different ways. What was jumping out to me would have been, and look, it worked, and it worked without an RFE, so you did it right. But if you're deconstructing it, what could you do on that? I would think I would get somebody from that knew about the circular economies, the things that you're talking about, that had a background in it, right? Because it's
yeah,
obviously your idea, but you're an attorney, so therefore you're an extension of him. So you on yourself, you can say it, but if you had somebody that was into recycling or something like that, say, hey, I'm an expert in this field because of my background in this, and I'm evaluating this case on the impact it's going to have on the United States economy, and then you bring in some source material on what that would do, right? Then they can evaluate that and incite it. And again, that Beast Tech case says that this is evidence, right?
yeah,
And it then takes it from just being your idea, where it can be a he said, she said decision, into giving you an advantage of having the expert say, here's why it's in the national interest. So therefore, adjudicator, you don't have to make a call on this. All you got to do
yeah.
is follow this one. So that's what I, just as we're talking about it, that might have been a
So
nugget.
Ingrid, your case
Really,
had no expert letters at all?
No, I didn't use any expert opinion letters. And I know, like, thinking back, I don't know why I didn't. I don't remember exactly. I was like, I think I wanted to keep it. I was like, okay, I'm going to submit this
yeah,
as strong as I can on the entrepreneurial angle,
yeah,
right? With
sure.
a business plan that explains all of
It's a
this.
good case, right? I mean,
Yeah, and in my argument, in my brief, I was able, during my research, I was able to find a lot of studies, like
Mhm. Can you
published
put that in there?
articles, journals, things
Yeah.
like that, that talked
Mhm.
about the circular economy. I found a lot of government resources, like current government reports and things like that, that talked about, the United States pushing towards a greener
Yeah.
economy. And I highlighted, anytime they mentioned circular economy, and I was like, see, this is what he's doing. This is what he's doing. And I would just point to that.
Well,
Um,
you did the thing, and that's what when we talk about one of the mistakes that I think a lot of immigration practitioners make, and what our clients want, is they think they can just get a letter from somebody to say something, right? So
right.
even an expert letter, even though the BSTEC case says that it's evidence, if it doesn't have source material, it's just somebody there that's on this witness stand that you can't cross-examine. So they'll knock it down, and they'll think, I got this important person to say I'm good at whatever. So, one technique would be to have all that evidence that you have, and to have an expert explain what's important in it, right? And then it's sort of a component that, and you take and refer to, the expert analyzed this and said this, and then I'll put that in my brief, right?
Yeah,
So you just did it directly, and it worked, and it should have
right.
worked, right? I mean, you just
Yeah,
said, here's the knowledge, and this is why it is what it does. But one other thing that you could add, now again, some cases are better than others, right? You didn't need it, you already had it all, right? But sometimes you're scraping, and you're at the beginning, or they have an idea, and they don't have the Brazilian company that made any money. They just have an idea, right?
right.
And that's
And
when
also, John, what you're
you
saying
might
is
need to have the expert.
future proof that if you need to one day, take it to court, you can now say,
Right.
listen, we
Yeah.
did extra letters and
Right.
that's evidence. And so you
Yeah.
have like
100%. See,
protection.
that's what it makes a deterrent for that.
Yeah.
Because if you have an expert evaluating it and saying it's good, and then they come in and they just disagree with it, right? They can't. The
Yeah.
case says they can't. Whereas if you put it in there with them, they could just say it's not substantial enough. I don't think
Yeah.
it's significant. So that's a great point, Pierre. That the non-attorney in the room came up with the nugget that would have been what it would have been the violation of the APA. Would have been not looking at the expert's opinion and giving it the gravitas that the Supreme Court says that it is.
Yeah.
So wonderful case, Ingrid. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's a lot of fun, and congratulations on that
Thank
great
you.
win.
Thank
Is
you.
there anything additional that you wanted to add to it, Attorney Perez, on the case?
I think that, you know, I do use expert opinion letters on quite a few cases too, but I've also not used them on cases and gotten them
Sure.
through.
Of course.
I think sometimes for me, I make the strategic decision to not include them directly in the case, like on the first initial filing, if I think that, you know, if I get an RFE, maybe this is something that I can save, you know, for an
Yeah.
RFE.
Yeah.
Good point.
From a
And I think,
strategy perspective, you want to
Yeah,
have
yeah,
something to
point. You have
reply
something
with.
to come
Yeah.
back
right.
with. Yeah.
You know, and I think maybe, you know, thinking back, maybe in this case, because I was expecting an RFE
Yeah.
because we did premium process, I may have just thought, you know what, I'll save this in my back pocket in case I need to, because I wasn't quite sure. I was shocked that it was approved without an RFE, you know, and I was very, very happy. And the client was like you don't understand. Like this family cried,
Yeah.
they
That's
went to
good.
church and prayed for me, and I'm like, great, do
Yeah.
all that. You know, it was really amazing. So,
And as a
um,
bonus, you saved him, you know, the money for
yeah.
the
So
expert
I think
letters.
you
So
make, you know, you have to kind of look at the case as a whole, and having that
Yeah.
you know, collegiality with other immigration attorneys that practice in this space is really good because we're able to share trends, right? We
Yeah.
know that right now there's a lot of RFEs coming.
Mhm.
And I actually am expecting one because I told my client not to do premium process and he insisted. And I have this other case that I just filed a little while ago for an EB-1 and I have an RFE coming. I'm like, great, you know? So, you know, we see these trends and we're able to sort of adjust accordingly, which is nice.
Very good.
Perfect.
Well, Pierre, I
Thank
think
you
we've
so
hit
much.
the bewitching hour of
Yes,
12
we did.
noon.
I want to thank all of you for joining today's collab. Just a quick reminder as a disclaimer to everyone watching and listening, nothing we spoke about today has been legal advice. Please don't take anything as legal advice unless you have a if you'd like legal advice, please do consult with one of our attorneys in this call in a client attorney relationship. And with that being said, I want to thank all of you for being here and teaching all of us so much. But also, it's just beautiful to see attorneys talking to attorneys and collaborating and not feeling intimidated to share ideas, because that's how everyone grows. So thanks and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank
you
you.
too. Have a
Ready?
good weekend.
Weekend.